lawyer for the Loughinisland families. So I'll just ask Niall if he wouldn't mind, and thanks incidentally for talking to me, Niall. I'm very grateful to you. Maybe just give us a little recap for those who mightn't understand or know about the whole Loughinisland case and the Loughinisland families.
Well, basically, Loughinisland is a small rural parish in South Down, about 25-30 miles from Belfast. It is typical of many of the all of the rural villages in Ireland. There's one primary school, a Catholic church, a graveyard, a GAA club, and a small bar.
And why is it famous?
In 1984, during the World Cup, Ireland were playing Italy in Giant Stadium in New York, and it has gone down as one of the greatest days in Irish sport, and hopefully over the next few weeks we might have another one or two. But in the second half of the match, with Ireland leading 1-0 after Ray Houghton's goal, two UVF gunmen burst into a small bar, not longer than 30 feet. 15 people were in the bar, and one UVF man knelt down on his knee with obvious military experience, we now know, and opened up with a VZ-58 automatic rifle, firing 29 bullets, and killed 6 men who were gathered in the bar to watch a match. They included Barney Green, who was 87 years old and would become the oldest person ever killed in our recent conflict. It also murdered Marie Byrne, her brother and husband. She suffered a double loss. At that time she was pregnant and would go on to rear a young family and a son who would never know his father or uncle.
That was in the 1990s. Why is it in the news now?
Well, the families never felt that they benefited from an appropriate police investigation. It occurred 6 weeks before the IRA ceasefire and 3 months before the Loyalist ceasefires, and our local political scene then became overrun with the peace process, which would come to a political conclusion in 1988 with the Good Friday Agreement. And with that momentum, the families never felt that the investigation was given the appropriate focus, but they would have been more than enthusiastic about the prospect of a peace process given the horror that was visited upon them. So in 2004, 10 years after the atrocity, the families came together. Emma Rogan, who has spoken courageously over the last couple of days, was 8 years old when her father was murdered, was 18, and she was a young, confident adult, articulate, educated, and independent of thought, and she wanted to know what happened. The young mothers who had been widows were now 10 years on and wanted to know what happened.
When you say wanted to know what happened, I mean they knew what had happened. What
Yes.
was it they still wanted to know?
Well, there was a persistent suspicion of collusion. At that time, in 2004, there were concerns becoming much more strongly advocated by families such as the family of Pat Finucane, who really have ploughed a courageous furrow that has pioneered a way that a lot of families now have the confidence to take their own cases forward. The revelations surrounding the Mount Vernon UVF, pioneered by Raymond McCord, was becoming much more prominent. So there was a general atmosphere that cases should be re-examined to consider the specific facts. And the families had never really had any interaction at all with the police. There was a massive amount of evidence that was uncovered immediately. Within 12 hours of the atrocity, the getaway car was found intact, not burnt out. That presented a treasure trove of forensic evidence. Society had understood the developments in forensic science with the advent of DNA, and the families thought, well, the car was found, there must be a fingerprint, there must be DNA. They knew that within 6 weeks, workmen from the DOE found a bag which contained 3 balaclavas, 3 boiler suits, 3 sets of gloves, 3 handguns, and the VZ-58 that was used. That was again a treasure trove of forensic information, and they just wondered, with the developments in political science, and with the developments in forensic science, could there be something in this? Could there be a breakthrough that maybe somebody hasn't looked at that might lead to prosecutions?
Because nobody's been prosecuted.
Nobody has ever been charged and brought before a court, despite the massive amount of evidence. 177 exhibits.
But you had the Al Hutchinson report. What year was that? And he was the ombudsman at the time.
Yes, so just to take us up from 2004 to 2011, the families instructed me in January 2005, and we then became engaged in a critical engagement with the police. We met the police quite openly, and some of the facts that emerged from early meetings with the police, albeit they were being presented in a positive light, were not positive at all. We learned at an early stage that the car had been destroyed within 10 months, which was a complete investigative abnormality. So we brought a complaint to the police ombudsman, who at that time was no alone, but such was the magnitude of his case, she could not begin and conclude an investigation, and really the investigation became conducted by Al Hutchinson. Al Hutchinson then...
Who was her successor?
Who was her successor.
As ombudsman.
As police ombudsman. He had an experience and a profile as a oversight commissioner for the transition from RUC to PSNI, and had therefore an intrinsic experience of policing in the north. He got the job, and we engaged with his investigators. The facts which emerged from his report were damning. It was quite clear that the forensic investigation was appalling. 9 out of 16 suspects who were arrested did not have their fingerprints, hair samples or DNA taken. In the context of the forensic opportunity that the exhibits recovered presented, that was a damning indictment. However, that did not lead itself to what I would have considered the natural legal conclusion in terms of the definition of collusion.
So what did Hutchinson conclude?
He tried to portray a Keystone Cops investigation bad but not malevolent. I was reflecting on some of the commentary that we made at the time. It was only a 60-page report with a lot of blank pages at the start and finish, a very salubrious index, and the words special and branch did not appear in his report. The families had complained that they feared, did not know, but that they feared, given the experience of the Finucane family and Raymond McCord's family, they feared that there may have been informers involved in the atrocity. There was no mention whatsoever about the role of informers.
So this case was taken then in the light of a more recent report?
So in June 2011, the families were devastated by Al's conclusions. We took a judicial review and quashed, took to the High Court, and the High Court quashed Al's report. And in the time it took us to get the case from receipt of report in June 11 until December 2012, Al Hutchinson had departed the scene. At that time, there were 3 damning separate independent reports, one conducted by an NGO, the Committee on the Administration of Justice, the CHA, a second report by Tony McCusker from the Department of Justice, and a third report by the Criminal Justice Inspectorate, the inspector of whom was Dr. Maguire. And the collective conclusion of those 3 reports was that the police ombudsman suffered from a lowering of operational independence, a quite sensitive couched phrase. But the fact was, Al Hutchinson's tenure was no longer tenable. He left. Dr. Maguire then successfully was appointed to the post, having had the experience of conducting the investigation into his impartiality and independence as CGI inspector. And Dr. Maguire's first role was to suspend the historic... As police ombudsman, was to suspend the historic directorate, to reset systems and policies, to breed a new sense of confidence. And it was within that new sense of confidence that the families engaged enthusiastically with Dr. Maguire.
What did Dr. Maguire come up with that was different?
Well, on Thursday, Dr. Maguire published his report, a 160-page report, 44,000 words, very, very complex report, and it is black and white from the field report in 2011. Whereas Al Hutchinson did not mention the words special and branch, Dr. Maguire forensically took apart the role of special branch in this atrocity and other atrocities.
And what was the role?
Well, the killer gang, it would appear, if one reads the report, and I will give you the web link to the report that you can post so people can read it for themselves. It would appear that persons A, M and K were, at least one of which was an informer, at least two of whom were members of the Ulster Defence Regiment, a local regiment of the British Army. And A, M and K, it would appear police had intelligence within 24 hours that they had committed this awful atrocity. So members of the UDR and police informers committed this atrocity. They would go on to work as police informers after the atrocity, even with the police intelligence status being that they had committed the atrocity. And it would appear on reflection, Dr. Maguire's investigators had access to the police intelligence from the previous 6 years. And really, the dreadful tale in this case starts with the murder of Jack Kilty in Dundrum in 1988. And from there, we can trace the history of Person A.
That's the father
of Patrick Kilty, the comedian. And the gang would commit murder in the South Down area, operating with impunity, operating under the full knowledge of Special Branch, and that confidence would manifest itself in this atrocity.
Are you saying that Special Branch knew who had carried out the killing of these 6 people who were watching the football game, didn't do anything about it, and continued to employ them while they carried out other killings?
There were no other killings after Loughinisland because the ceasefires would occur.
Yeah.
Loughinisland was the horrible conclusion to a murderous experience.
So are you saying that these people were involved in other?
Yes, the report attributes their role to murders in the South Down area and also in Belfast.
Prior to the Loughinisland killings.
The murder of Martin Lavery, who was a relative of Sinn Féin councillors Danny and Bobby at the time, was committed by this gang. The murder of Joseph Reynolds at Shorts, in what was an attempt at mass murder. There was 8 workmen, all of the Reynolds family. That was committed with the same VZ58. A mass murder attempt at the Thurifirth Inn in South Down was committed by this gang. The murder of Jack Kilty, countless other attempted murders. This was a trail of murders under the full cognizance of Special Branch, which came to its horrific conclusion in Loughinisland.
So Special Branch weren't just covering up for what had happened. They were, what were they? Were they giving instructions to these people, or were they simply allowing these people to do these things and not saying anything?
It was a complete carte blanche for these people to operate with impunity.
And they knew that the Special Branch knew about them and wouldn't do anything.
The intelligence that Dr. Maguire's investigators have had access to would make that conclusion, and that conclusion is very strongly reported without fear or favour in the report. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, another aspect that bears to be considered is, how did this VZ58 end up in Ireland? There had never been a VZ58 rifle used in Ireland before 1988. It was part of a massive consignment of weaponry that was imported
from South Africa
in 1988. And the report is the first official narrative on that South African arms importation. I think a very caustic fact is that we were told that the De Silva report into the murder of Pat Finnegan would be all that the family would need to understand in relation to the collusion that was involved in the murder of Pat Finnegan. However, when one reads it, there are simply 2 pages on the South African arms importation. Dr. Maguire's report has 40 pages. I would implore anybody with an interest in our recent history to read those 40 pages, because it lays bare the lie that has been allowed to be propagated that the state knew nothing about this arms importation. There was explicit intelligence records held by Special Branch in the 6 months prior to. The funding for this arms importation came from a robbery committed in the Northern Bank in Portadown, all under the specific guise, cognizance and foreknowledge of Special Branch. But it doesn't stop with Special Branch, it stops in London.
Well, when you say it doesn't stop with Special Branch, could I ask you, like the report says that there were many officers, I think they said, of the RUC who were honestly working very hard to solve this case, the Loughinisland case. Is it possible that that would be the case? I mean, would word not filter through in the organisation as big as the RUC? Would word not filter through that Special Branch maybe knew something? Or
well, it appeared that Special Branch were a force within a force. That's a phrase.
Was it watertight?
Well, I think the best way to reflect upon the question that you've asked is to look at Police Officer 3 in the report. Police Officer 3 I described on Thursday as a good apple in a rotten orchard. Police Officer 3 investigated the murder of Jack Keelty and secured a confession from person L, who is a familial relative of person K, it would appear, who is part of the murder gang.
And was this police officer not a Special Branch officer?
No. He it would appear he's a detective inspector in CID. I don't know who he is, but Police Officer 3 in the report knew that he had to search Collusion, Orange Hall, and this is in the report in May 1988. But knew that if his intentions to search Collusion, Orange Hall became known in Newcastle Police Station, that the search would be of no benefit. So he picked two close colleagues to search the Orange Hall and found firearms, handguns, balaclavas, gloves, boiler suits, and UDR montages of Republican suspects in the South Down area. He had the UDR photo album, dusted for fingerprints, and arrested person A, who we know to be the informer and part of the murder gang in Loughinisland.
Well, when you say he was a good apple in a rotten orchard, are you saying that it wasn't simply the Special Branch who were concealing evidence or even running agents? Well,
the report says that when 6 suspects were to be arrested in August 1994 for the Loughinisland atrocity, a policeman tipped them off the day before.
You could still argue that that's still just a few rotten apples in a
well, when you look at the systemic nature and when you look at the intelligence that was retained by Special Branch, they had that
was Special Branch.
They had a policy called NDD, not for downward dissemination. They had another policy called slow waltz, which is another offensive term which will become part of the terminology of collusion. Slow waltz was the intelligence management system that they had to create a sterile zone between receipt of information and action. But within that sterile zone, murders take place.
What are the families now looking for? You spoke about them wanting to know what had happened, the truth presumably. Do they want justice as well as the truth, or just truth?
We had a very frank conversation when I first sat down to receive their instructions in 2005, and I asked them what they considered justice meant, and it was very apparent early on that society has voted for, I voted for the Good Friday Agreement, which limits the sentencing powers of the court to 2 years. And it was quite clear that justice for an atrocity like this cannot be served by a 2-year sentence. So justice cannot happen constitutionally. They entered into this process for truth recovery. They wanted to know what happened. A very simple ambition, and they have recovered the truth. Mm-hmm. The families were euphoric on Wednesday when the devil of the detail was relayed to them, but that euphoria very quickly turned to anger and outrage at the detail. This is a difficult truth to come to terms with. Mm-hmm. It is a ugly, unvarnished, terrifying, disgusting truth that they have now been visited with, and there must now be accountability. There must now be an appreciation and a response from the state. They know exactly what has happened. It is the state's archives and records which has informed these fact-based conclusions. So the state must now deliver. This cannot sit as a dusty report on a shelf. There must now be action for the families.
So in practical terms, does that mean what? An apology from someone? Is it from...
Well, an apology doesn't do it. You know,
there
should be apologies coming anyway, but an apology won't be the...
Well, what would the families be satisfied with or settle for in terms of acknowledgement?
Well, we are still working through the legal mechanisms that will inform our strategy going forward. It's no secret that the families have issued civil litigation processes. The High Court writs have been issued for some years now, which have been held in abeyance pending the receipt of the police ombudsman's report, and they will be taken forward. But
they want to bring people to the court.
People, yes, absolutely.
And are these people still around? I mean, are we talking about police officers here? Or are we talking about?
Well, there are two sets of people that are culpable. There's persons A, M, and K who committed the atrocity.
Yes.
I would fear, and prosecutions to the extent that they can bring sentences for 2 years should be explored. But I fear that the opportunity for prosecution has been denied to the families because far from securing and preserving evidence by the police in their investigation, they didn't secure and preserve fingerprints, DNA, or hair follicles in the case where they had a balaclava with a hair follicle on it. So that opportunity for forensic testing is gone.
So you might find...
And what evidence was recovered has been destroyed. So the opportunity for prosecution has been denied by the systemic failings in the investigative process.
Aye.
So where do we move then? Those are the people that committed the atrocity. Who are the people that are responsible for the cover-up? I don't know what the evidence is. Dr. Maguire laments the fact that there was documents destroyed. We hear this repeated farce of asbestos in Gulf Road Barracks, which resulted in the wholesale destruction of evidence and intelligence by the RUC. Asbestos has been the state's convenient shredding machine here.
Yeah. So essentially they see the people responsible for this as being, of course, the people who killed their loved ones, but also quite a few people within special branch or even in the RUC generally. Do they have grievances, or do they suspect that the trail goes further than the police force?
Well, it must. It must. The intelligence framework within which special branch operated was set down by Sir Patrick Walker in 1980. The complete absence of guidelines. Special branch officers who will speak publicly now will lament on reflection that there was no guidelines for them to operate within. Well, you know, the absence of law is not a defence for crime.
Mm-hmm. Who was Sir Patrick Walker again?
He was commissioned by the Security Service to conduct a root and branch analysis of how the state would respond to the civil conflict that was happening. And really, it is from his report in 1980 that nobody has ever seen because it's marked top secret. But we know from that report that the primacy of intelligence was asserted at the expense of investigative obligations, which is in itself a breach of European law under Article 2 of the European Convention.
But the fact is that the state had agents or had informers, and for them to be effective, some people would say, they really do need to have some degree of ethical manoeuvring. In other words, would there not be a case to be made for saying, well, we will allow this to happen, or this happened and we regret it, but we're not going to put the finger in these people because in the future these people could save lives as informers or as agents. Does that make sense to you, that
Absolutely.
argument?
And you know, nobody would deny the fact that in any ordinary society, policing can only be effective with the societal contract of reporting crime before it happens. If you know that it's going to happen, it's a civil obligation.
Yeah.
What has happened here is the obverse of that. It has been turned upside down, and when you see montages being handed from the state to the killers, via the informer route, kill this person. That's the opposite of an ordinary police and intelligence.
Just run that past me once again.
Well, we see in this
What
case,
was the line there you just mentioned? From who to who?
Well, from UDR, for example.
Okay.
Photographic albums of suspects.
Right. Oh, I see, yeah.
These are the people that need to be watched,
Yeah.
stopped. What we seen was that far from intelligence coming from the ground up. Intelligence was going from the top down, and it was from the bottom that these extrajudicial killings were being carried out.
Right. So that was members of the UDR you're talking about who were issuing
in a specific context, but that then became, we would argue, a systemic policy that infected the entirety of the state's management of intelligence.
You mean the security forces?
Yes.
And are you saying that there would be political people in politics beyond the security forces who would have had a hand in making these recommendations for?
Well, I would say that the evidence would point very strongly towards that. The report in itself speaks very strongly and points a strong hand towards Ulster resistance, who were set up in the Ulster Hall in 1986, and anybody who has any appreciation of our local history knows exactly who was involved in Ulster resistance. It was Ian Paisley and many other of his political colleagues. Ulster resistance were involved explicitly, the report will advise us, in the arms importation. Person D, I understand, had a very high political profile and continues perhaps to have a very strong.
But didn't they
political
disown?
influence.
Didn't Ian Paisley and company disown Ulster resistance once they found out that they were involved in violent activity or securing arms?
Well, they were involved when the arms importation was conceived, and Person D, if the report was read, was very strongly involved in the arms importation.
Are there any members? You mentioned the special branch in particular. Are there any members of the special branch working within the RUC or within the PSNI at present?
That was a question that appeared yesterday as the fallout of the report began to be digested by journalists, commentators, and lawyers. And I would be horrified if it was the fact that anybody referred to in this report was still a member of the PSNI.
I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, are there any members who were any members of the present PSNI who were also in the past members of the special branch?
I personally don't know, but I would be very concerned if that was the case.
Do we not know? Is there not a record of who, or is it just that you haven't particularly researched that?
Well, I wouldn't be privy to that knowledge. It's not.
Is it kept secret?
There's not a public database.
It's not. So if I wanted to know who was, say, Officer X at the moment, and I'm very interested, wonder was he in the special branch back then? Would I be able to find that out?
It would depend upon the specific legal framework that you were engaged in.
Suppose I was just an interested member of the public.
Probably not.
Really?
Probably
Why?
not.
What would the reason be for that?
I would imagine that your right to interrogate that information would be specific to the
All I want to know is,
legal framework.
I'm not going to interrogate it. I'm just tell me.
As a citizen, an interested citizen, I would be surprised if the state would bear up that knowledge.
And you think is the reason because the special branch was doing the things they did?
Perhaps. We know from a whole suite of legal challenges that have been successfully undertaken in recent years that there was the scandal of retire, rehire, for example, where we had the event that people would benefit from obscene retirement packages. Patton cost society £500 million. £500 million was spent placating this security constituency that we now know is responsible for the intelligence failings which have been described as an indefensible.
Is that not a bit harsh that was Patton trying not to make a fresh start, as they say, with the PSNI, and that policing was always a big problem. So
it was a big problem that had to be addressed, but the £500 million reward for what now reports are telling us was a policing failure was a very high expense to understand. And I have to say this, when one looks at the paltry sum that the most senior law officer in our jurisdiction, the Lord Chief Justice, is seeking of £25 million to resource judges, state lawyers, a coroner service, investigators for coroner service to conduct what is a very small amount, 96 inquests, that is being held hostage by a political impasse is a disgrace and is an ongoing breach by the state of Article 2. And one has to recall that the Office of First Minister and Deputy First Minister did not sign the European Convention on Human Rights. London did, and London can't derogate its international legal obligations to political consensus and storming.
I don't want to keep you too long, Niall, because we've been talking for a long time, but there's just one or two other questions briefly. Some people have asked the question, why Loughinisland? This was clearly a sectarian attack. They simply wanted to kill, presumably just kill Catholics, and these were innocent Catholics not involved in any way in paramilitary activity or anything else like that. Why go to a remote, small community to effect these killings? If you're a sectarian, would it not make more sense to go somewhere where there's more of them?
Well, this is the great, horrible mystery, and we don't know. Nobody knows. But the logistic information that the report lays bare is that it would appear that the person I in the report was answerable to the Schenkel Road Command of the UVF, and person I was immediately charged in response to the murder by the NLA of 4 loyalists on the Schenkel Road 2 days prior to Loughinisland. Person I was charged with getting Fenian blood on the street immediately. Person I, we know, had the nexus with A, M and K in the report, and it would appear A, M and K operated in the Clough Dundrum area of South Down, and
so it just sort of happened that was convenient.
It was that factual chain of command
so
that led it to the South Down.
There's nothing more sinister than that, or there was no wider connections, or
it would appear that the report, and I'm only operating from the facts that the report provides me with. It would appear that is the factual logistic that led this. Yeah.
Okay. The final question is this: are you happy with the way that this case, since the report came through, has been reported? There are people who say, for example, that the southern media have virtually ignored it. Have you any sense of that?
Yes, I was absolutely dumbstruck by the fact that the Irish Independent in the south yesterday did not have a single word of this report in the entirety of its newsprint.
So the report came out on Thursday,
and on Friday the Irish Independent 72-page paper didn't have a paragraph. I can't understand how a national newspaper 90 miles from an event of a mass atrocity, in which we must remember happened during a Republic of Ireland soccer match. The Irish FA must be given credit 4 years ago during the Euros in 2012, on the actual anniversary, the 18th of June, Ireland played Italy, which was the exact same match. It's just an unbelievable happenstance of time. And the Irish FA, I wrote to John Delaney on behalf of the families and asked would the Ireland team consider marking the matter with an act of remembrance, a minute's silence, or perhaps black armbands. John Delaney, to his eternal credit, in a very genuine, sensitive and private manner, took the family's private request on, and the Ireland team wore black armbands.
I remember well.
I couldn't believe it. The families couldn't believe it. They were so proud that there would be such an act of international remembrance broadcast across the world. So the Irish FA understood the societal significance in the south, but the right-wing media who seemed to have
Well, what about RTE? You mentioned the big newspaper in the south, the Independent.
RTE had a correspondent there, a respected correspondent who knew that that's where today's news story was going to take him. It took 14 minutes to consume a minute's attention of the RTE news.
It got 14 minutes on there?
No, it took 14 minutes into the programme.
Into the programme before it was mentioned?
Yeah. So that's an editorial decision that has been taken by RTE News.
Isn't it extraordinary?
It is extraordinary.
Any thought why it is?
Well, it would appear that when the falsehood of the history of the North is now being corrected by independent reports, that creates a truth that is difficult to fit the agendas which would appear to infect the southern media.
So essentially you're saying that the accepted narrative of it's all the IRA's fault, that this is complicating that picture and therefore they don't want to too widely report that.
Yes, and yesterday, in February, on the anniversary of Pat Finucane's murder, the family had invited an internationally renowned expert from the United Nations on truth recovery and non-recurrence, Pablo de Greiff, to speak in the Europa Hotel. And when Mr. de Greiff makes commentary, it resounds around the world, a very strong advocate for truth recovery and human rights. And the state understood the significance of his attendance in Belfast, although it might not have been appreciated by our local media. And Theresa Villiers, our Secretary of State, was brought to make a keynote address that morning, and she spoke of what we being the state faced is a series of pernicious counter narratives, and that she would not stand idly by and watch as history was rewritten. Well, she would go on to state in quite insensitive and abusive terms, the state, the RUC, did not pull the trigger in Loughinisland, specifically referenced Loughinisland. And I wrote to some local press at the time, and it wasn't picked up appropriately. It wasn't the RUC who pulled the trigger at Loughinisland, but it was the RUC whose agents pulled the trigger at Loughinisland. It was the state, the MOD, who supervised the importation of the South African arms weapons. The VZ-58 had never been in Ireland until January 1988, and then was through the sponsorship supervision of the state. It was the state who failed to gather and secure evidence, and when they did, it was the RUC that destroyed it. So it's not a pernicious counter-narrative, and when history is being corrected, and when history is being informed by fact and truth, that is not a rewriting of history. That is a correction of a false history. So the false history is a pernicious counter-narrative here. And when Theresa Villiers was asked yesterday to apologise for that grossly insensitive reference of Loughinisland, she didn't even have the grace to understand the import of her insult, and she said no. And I don't think her time as Secretary of State is going to be for long with regards to her stance on Brexit, which in and of itself is a constitutional disgrace, because the event of Britain leaving the EU would undermine the Good Friday Agreement, which has stitched into it the European Convention of Human Rights and our access to the EU. So she has a political relevance anyway, and will continue to be so. Okay,
final question, very briefly, Niall. Working in this case, you must have an awful lot of mixed feelings of different kinds. Could you identify one particular feeling you have? Is it of anger? Is it of sorrow? What is it that overwhelmingly you'd say, this is what I feel especially?
It's the privilege that I, in our practice, has from representing people of such dignity and grace, and being able to work to the best of our abilities to achieve the best outcome for them. It's really that privilege. When we were in the room receiving a private briefing on Wednesday from Dr. Maguire, the emotions were of euphoria at receiving the unvarnished truth, but that euphoria turned very quickly to an apoplectic outrage at what the truth actually looked like. I did not comprehend how terrifying this truth would be.
So you feel outrage as well as...
How could you not? Policemen destroying evidence, telling their informers that they're about to be arrested, other policemen feeling that they can't speak about intended searches to recover weapons in a police station. It doesn't get any worse than that.
Do you expect there'll be some degree of, as they say, closure in this eventually?
Closure is not a word that is befitting to a family's experience. Trauma is an ongoing open wound. There are different experiences in life which will make life more manageable, but it never goes away in my experience.
Managing the pain. Thank you very much, Niall.
Thank you.